My name is Sarah, I'm 42, and my husband and sister didn't just have an affair, they had a baby, and then demanded I pay for it. Before I tell you how their own greed landed them a restraining order instead of a blank check, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The scream wasn't just loud, it was jagged, a rip in the fabric of a carefully curated afternoon. It tore through the serene, minimalist calm of my architectural firm's office, a space defined by muted grays, clean glass, and the quiet, focused hum of creativity. That scream was a splash of ugly, violent color on a monochrome canvas. You're selfish, Sarah. You're ruining this family. It was my mother. Of course, it was my mother. Her face, framed by the sleek glass doors of the entrance, was blotchy and contorted, a mask of righteous fury that I knew better than my own reflection. For a heart-stopping moment, the entire office froze. Fingers hovered over expensive keyboards. The gentle scratching of a stylus on a tablet ceased. A junior designer, mid-sip of his latte, held the cup suspended in midair. Then, the whispers started, a low, rustling sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. All eyes, pitying, curious, horrified, were on me. I stood by my desk, a blueprint for a new city library unrolled before me, my heart hammering a steady, cold rhythm against my ribs. I had spent a lifetime learning to build walls, to compartmentalize, to present a placid surface to the world no matter the storm raging beneath. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I just stood, silent and still. My colleague, Jessica, bless her fiercely loyal soul, was already moving before I could even blink. She didn't make a scene. She just glided towards the entrance, her voice a low, soothing murmur against my mother's escalating shrieks about duty and family and my cold, cold heart. "Ma'am, this is a private office. Let's find a better place to have this conversation," Jessica said, her hand gently but firmly on my mother's elbow. She guided her toward the elevators, a picture of professional grace in the face of unhinged chaos. The last thing I heard before the elevator doors slid shut was a final, wailing accusation, "She's trying to destroy us." The silence she left behind was profound, heavier than any sound. It was filled with the unspoken questions of my colleagues. I slowly walked back to my desk, the feeling of 100 pairs of eyes burning into my back. But I wasn't looking at them. I wasn't even looking at the library blueprint anymore. My gaze was fixed on my computer screen, on an email I'd received that morning. The sender was my lawyer, Mrs. Thompson. The subject line read, "Violation of cease and desist order." A tiny, bitter smile touched my lips. This public humiliation, this desperate, ugly tantrum, it wasn't the end. It was the linchpin. It was the final, beautifully wrapped gift they had unknowingly handed me. It was the beginning of their end. They just didn't know it yet. To understand how a mother could scream at her daughter in a public place, you have to understand my family's peculiar solar system. My younger sister, Emma, was the sun, brilliant, demanding, and hot to the touch. Everything and everyone in our family orbited her, drawn to her gravitational pull of manufactured drama and perpetual need. And I was Pluto, a distant, forgotten moon, only noticed when I momentarily blocked her light or failed to reflect it back at the proper angle. It had always been this way. The memory that defines it all for me is from when I was 10. I had my heart set on a professional drafting set, a serious tool with German-engineered compasses and rulers, not a toy. I'd saved my allowance for months. That same week, Emma, in a fit of pique because she wasn't allowed a second piece of cake, threw a book across the living room. It missed the sofa and shattered a porcelain bird, a delicate, hand-painted piece that was my grandmother's, a small part of our family's already small inheritance. The aftermath was a masterclass in our family's dynamics. Emma cried, great, heaving sobs of performative remorse. My mother cooed over her, stroking her hair. "Oh, my poor baby, you didn't mean it." My father sighed, looking not at the shattered heirloom, but at me. "You should have been watching her, Sarah." At my birthday party a few days later, Emma unwrapped a brand new, obscenely expensive doll, a reward for feeling so terribly sad about the bird. I received a practical, beige sweater. When my face fell, my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister and chief enforcer of the family narrative, swooped in. "Come on now, Sarah," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet as she patted my shoulder. "Emma's the baby. She doesn't know any better. You're the older one, you have to be the bigger person." It was the family mantra, the invisible ink on the contract I never signed. I learned my lesson. You couldn't fix a rigged system, you could only leave it. I moved out at 18, put myself through college with a patchwork of scholarships and waitressing jobs, and clawed my way into the competitive world of architecture. I poured every ounce of my being into my career, into building a life so stable, so serene, that the gravitational pull of my family's chaos couldn't touch it. I designed and built my own house, a sanctuary of clean lines, natural light, and quiet spaces. I married David, a man who seemed kind, steady, and blessedly normal. For over a decade, it worked. My contact with my family was a carefully managed trickle, polite holiday calls, emotionless birthday cards. I had peace. It was a fragile peace, but it was mine. Then, about a year ago, the phone rang. It was Emma, sobbing hysterically. Her latest boyfriend had decamped, she was drowning in credit card debt, she hated her job. It was the same story I'd heard a dozen times before, just with different names. But this time, she added a new verse. "I miss you, Sarah," she cried, her voice thick with practiced misery. "I miss my big sister. Mom and Dad miss you, too. We were wrong to let you drift away. We just want our family back." Against every instinct honed by years of self-preservation, a stupid, traitorous flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe people could change. Maybe, after all this time, they finally saw me. I let her in. I invited her over for dinner, introducing her to David. He was the epitome of kindness, listening to her woes with a sympathetic ear. "We should help her out," he said to me later that night as we cleaned up. I was hesitant. "I don't know, David." He cut me off, wrapping his arms around me. "Look, that big promotion is on the horizon for me at work, and your salary is fantastic. We're more than stable. We can afford to be generous. She's your sister." He made it sound like my hesitation was a moral failing. So I relented. Soon, Emma was a fixture in our home, a ghost from a past I thought I'd escaped. She'd drop by unannounced, usually when I was at a site meeting or working late. Just keeping David company, she'd trill if I called. "He's so funny, you're so lucky." I started noticing things. The way she'd let her hand linger on his arm when she laughed. The inside jokes they shared that would stop the moment I entered the room. The way David started defending her, echoing phrases I hadn't heard in years. "You're being too hard on her, Sarah. She's just had a rough time." A cold knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach, a familiar chill from a forgotten draft. But I pushed it down. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was letting the past poison the present. I had to be the bigger person. 5 months after Emma's tearful return, David sat me down on our charcoal gray sofa, the one I'd agonized over for weeks to find. His eyes were shining with an emotion I mistook for joy. "Honey," he said, his voice uncharacteristically thick. "We're pregnant." A tidal wave of pure, unadulterated happiness washed over me, so powerful it obliterated every suspicion, every red flag. This was it. The final piece. A family of my own, built on my own terms. The next few weeks were a dizzying, joyful blur. I bought stacks of books on pregnancy and parenting. I started sketching out designs for a nursery, a world of soft light and gentle curves. I even opened a separate savings account, a nascent college fund, feeling a thrill of maternal foresight. I bought David a dad-to-be mug, which he used every morning with a wide smile. I was floating on a cloud of domestic bliss. But the oddities didn't stop. They got worse, creeping into the edges of my happiness like a dark stain. When we announced the news to my family, there was a strange beat of silence before the requisite cheers. I saw my mother shoot a look at Emma, a look I couldn't decipher. Later, Emma didn't hug me, she hugged David, a long, proprietary embrace that felt all wrong. The little comments continued, tiny paper cuts on my joy. When we talked about baby names, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, David and I were just talking about that the other day. We decided we hate the name Kevin. We decided." One afternoon, I came home early from a meeting that was cancelled. I walked in quietly through the back door and found them in the kitchen. Emma was complaining about a bout of nausea. As she spoke, I saw her, for a split second, instinctively place a protective hand over her own stomach before quickly dropping it. The image seared itself onto my brain. It was a glitch in the matrix, a detail that didn't fit the narrative. It didn't make sense. None of it did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I was working late in my home office, trying to finish a proposal. David had gone to bed early, complaining of a headache. His phone, left on the kitchen counter, buzzed. Then buzzed again. He'd been so secretive with it lately, angling the screen away from me, snapping it shut when I walked by. An old, familiar anxiety, the kind I thought I'd outgrown, gnawed at me. I told myself I just needed to check an email from a contractor we were both using. A flimsy excuse, but enough to justify what I was about to do. My hands were trembling as I picked up the cool, smooth device. I used his thumbprint to unlock it. The screen flared to life, open to his text messages. The conversation at the top was with Emma. My heart started to pound, a sick, heavy thud against my ribs. I started to scroll up. And there it was. My entire life, my carefully constructed world, shattered into a million glowing pixels. Emma, he still hasn't said anything. Is he ever going to tell her? I can't keep pretending to be happy for her. It's making me sick. David, soon, I promise. We just need the right time. After my promotion comes through. Emma, the doctor says everything looks perfect. Our baby is strong and healthy. David, I know. I can't wait for our family to be real. Just a little longer. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's too busy planning the nursery. Emma, she's actually planning the nursery. I feel a little bad. David, don't. We deserve this. She's always been cold anyway. Our baby. Our family. She's always been cold anyway. Each word was a physical blow. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room, from my lungs. I sank to the kitchen floor, the phone clattering from my numb fingers. I was cold, so cold, a deep, cellular chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the slate tiles. It wasn't my baby. It was never my baby. It was a lie. A long, intricate, cruel lie. I don't remember walking back to the bedroom. I just remember the sight of him sleeping peacefully, the man I had loved and trusted, the architect of my ruin. I nudged him awake. He blinked at me, bleary-eyed, and then he saw my face. The confusion in his eyes morphed into dawning, pathetic guilt. I didn't have to say a word. He knew. He confessed in a torrent of pathetic excuses. The affair had started almost as soon as Emma came back into our lives. He was lonely. I was too focused on my career. Emma just understood him. The baby was theirs. Their grand plan was to wait until after the baby was born, to present me with their new, happy family as a fait accompli, hoping I'd just accept it. That I'd be the bigger person. I was so lonely, Sarah, he whimpered. You were never here. Not really. You were married to your job. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt nothing but a terrifying, hollow void where my heart used to be. I turned, walked into our walk-in closet, the one I had designed with his and her sections, and pulled out a suitcase. As I packed, my movements were robotic. The last thing I did before walking out the door was call my mother. My voice was a monotone. I thought, with the last shred of naivete in my body, that this would be the betrayal so great that she would finally, for once, be on my side. I told her everything, the words spilling out in a flat, dead tone. There was a long, static-filled pause on the other end of the line. Then her voice came, not with shock or outrage, but with a weary, profound disappointment in me. Sarah, after everything Emma has been through in her life, you have to find it in your heart to forgive them. You must. Think of the baby. That innocent child is still your niece. It's your family. That's when the numbness finally cracked. I hung up the phone without another word. I drove, not to a friend's house, I couldn't bear their pity, but to the nearest anonymous airport hotel. I checked into a sterile, beige room, closed the door, and leaned against it. And then, I fell apart. It wasn't quiet grief. It was a raw, ugly storm of rage and betrayal. I remember picking up the heavy glass water tumbler from the desk and hurling it against the wall, the sound of it shattering a brief, satisfying release in the crushing silence. I sank to the floor and sobbed, guttural, racking sobs, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. I cried for the life I thought I had, for the baby I had loved for a few precious weeks, for the little girl who was never, ever good enough. Sometime before dawn, the tears ran dry. I dragged myself to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, her face puffy, her eyes empty, hollowed out. But as I stared into those vacant eyes, something shifted. The emptiness began to fill, not with pain, but with something cold and hard and sharp as a shard of broken glass. They had taken everything from me. They would not get one thing more. The next morning, I sat in the plush leather chair opposite Mrs. Thompson, the best and most ruthless divorce lawyer in the city. She was a woman in her 60s with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for dismantling her opponents with quiet, surgical precision. I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice hoarse but steady. She listened patiently, her fingers steepled, not a flicker of judgment on her face. When I was done, she didn't offer condolences. She offered a strategy. First, we file for divorce on grounds of adultery. We will be swift and aggressive, she said, her voice crisp and cool as steel. We will leverage his infidelity to protect your assets. Second, and this is crucial, we send a formal cease and desist letter. We will send it via certified mail to your husband, your sister, and your parents. It will legally notify them to stop all forms of contact, calls, texts, emails, in-person visits. We build a wall, Sarah. A paper wall. And then we wait for them to run right into it. The law is on the side of the person who documents everything. The divorce was a bitter, ugly war. Just as she predicted, my entire family lined up to testify on David's behalf. They wove a tapestry of lies, painting me as a cold, ambitious shrew who had emotionally abandoned her kind, loving husband, driving him into the arms of my warm, nurturing sister. They fought me on every single asset. In the end, I lost a significant portion of my savings. It was a painful blow, but I kept the house, my sanctuary. I would not let them take that from me. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when the campaign of harassment began. The cease and desist letter was, to them, just a piece of paper. First, it was my mother, her voice a syrupy blend of guilt and command. Sarah, they're struggling financially, she said. David lost his job in the downturn. Emma can't work with the new baby. The baby needs things. You have all that money. It's your responsibility as a sister, as an aunt. No, I said, and hung up. Next, my father. His approach was softer, laced with the weak-willed pleading I knew so well. Honey, I know you're hurt, but your mother is making herself sick with worry over this. Can't you just help them out a little? For the sake of family peace? Dad, I said, my voice flat and even, the recorder app on my phone running silently. Have you received the registered letter from my attorney? This call is a direct violation of that legal notice. I heard his sharp intake of breath, a sputtering sound of indignation, before I disconnected the call. I became a meticulous archivist of their toxicity. Every call log was screenshotted. Every wheedling voicemail was saved and transcribed. Every email from a distant relative acting as their flying monkey was forwarded to Mrs. Thompson with a simple note, "More for the file." I changed the locks, the satisfying, heavy thunk of the new deadbolt a small victory. I installed a security system, a silent guardian for my hard-won peace. I went to my bank and methodically separated every financial tie, closing joint accounts with a cold, clinical efficiency that felt like reclaiming parts of my own soul. I was building a fortress, brick by methodical brick. I thought the worst was over. Then came my mother's screaming match in my office, and the certified letter that arrived a week later. David was suing me. He was suing for additional alimony and financial support, claiming his circumstances had changed dramatically and that I had a moral and financial obligation to support him, his new partner, and their child. The courtroom was small, stuffy, and smelled of old paper and stale coffee. On one side of the aisle sat David, looking haggard and put upon, and Emma, clutching their now 6-month-old baby like a prop, a living, breathing appeal to sympathy. My parents sat behind them, their faces set in grim, supportive lines. They looked like a Norman Rockwell painting of a salt-of-the-earth family wronged by a cold, modern world. Their lawyer, a slick man with a voice as smooth as oil, delivered a moving opening statement. He painted a picture of a devoted father, laid off in a tough economy, and a new mother, struggling to make ends meet, all while their wealthy, vindictive ex-wife and sister sat on a mountain of money, her heart hardened by bitterness. He spoke of medical bills for the baby, of the rising cost of diapers, of a child who deserved a stable home. He mentioned my recent promotion and high salary as proof of my ability to provide. It was a masterful performance, designed to pluck the heartstrings of any compassionate observer. Then it was Mrs. Thompson's turn. She stood up, the picture of calm, controlled power. "Your Honor," she began, her voice resonating with quiet authority, "we will not be disputing my client's financial success. Ms. Evans is a highly successful architect. She built her career from nothing, through years of hard work and unwavering determination." She paused, letting her words hang in the tense air. "The question before us today is not whether my client can afford to pay. The question is why the plaintiff, after his profound and admitted betrayal, believes he is entitled to one more cent of her success." She began to cross-examine David. "Mr. Evans," she asked, her tone conversational, "did you or did you not receive a letter from my office, sent via certified mail, advising you to cease all contact with my client?" He shifted in his seat. "Yes, but a simple yes or no will suffice, Mr. Evans." "Yes. And yet you chose to initiate this lawsuit, an action that by its very nature forces contact with my client. Why is that?" David fumbled, "For my son, for his well-being." "The well-being you were so concerned with when you began an affair with his mother's sister?" Mrs. Thompson asked mildly. The other lawyer shot to his feet, shouting objection, but the damage was done. Next, it was Emma's turn. Mrs. Thompson was even gentler with her. "Ms. Evans, were you aware of this legal notice?" "Yes," Emma said defiantly. "And did you encourage your partner to proceed with this lawsuit, knowing it would violate that notice and cause your sister further distress?" "She owes us," Emma blurted out, her voice rising. "She has everything. It's not fair." The baby on her lap began to cry. Finally, Mrs. Thompson turned back to the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "as you've heard, the plaintiffs were well aware of their legal obligations." She walked to her table and picked up a thick binder. "I would now like to enter into evidence the proof of their willful violation of that obligation." She placed the binder on the clerk's desk. Exhibit A, signed receipts for the cease and desist letters. Her voice was a steady, damning rhythm. Exhibit B, my client's phone logs, showing dozens of unsolicited calls from numbers belonging to the plaintiffs and their associates. She placed another file down. Exhibit C, a sworn, notarized affidavit from my client's colleague, Ms. Jessica Riley, detailing a public and deeply distressing confrontation initiated by Mrs. Evans Sr. at my client's place of business. The pile was growing. Exhibit D, a certified transcription of a voicemail left by Mr. Evans Sr., directly violating the order. My family looked stunned, their faces paling. David was staring at the pile of evidence as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. And that brings us to today, Mrs. Thompson said, turning to face the judge directly. Her voice dropped, becoming clear and deadly serious. Your Honor, this lawsuit is not a good faith request for financial support. This lawsuit is Exhibit E. It is the culmination of a malicious campaign of harassment. When phone calls, emotional blackmail, and public humiliation failed to extort money from my client, they weaponized the court system itself. This lawsuit is the final, desperate act of harassment, and we thank the plaintiff for submitting it into evidence for our petition for a permanent restraining order against every single one of them. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by the fretful whimpers of the baby. The trap had been sprung. And they had walked right into it, blinded by their own bottomless greed and entitlement. The judge, a stern-faced woman who I now saw had an air of profound weariness, slowly took off her glasses. She polished them with a cloth, her movements deliberate. Then she put them back on and looked at David, at Emma, at my parents. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of profound, cold indignation in her eyes. The judge's ruling was a masterwork of legal evisceration. She dismissed David's petition with prejudice, a legal term that meant he could never, ever file it against me again. She granted my request for a 5-year restraining order against David, Emma, and both of my parents, detailing the geographic and communication limits in painstaking detail. She finished with a scathing reprimand for wasting the court's time and resources on a frivolous, vindictive, and frankly, shameful suit. We walked out into the sterile brightness of the hallway, the courtroom doors closing behind us with a soft, final click. I felt light. As if a physical weight I'd been carrying for 30 years had just been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a year, I could take a full, deep breath. You must be so proud of yourself. It was Emma. Her face was a twisted mask of fury and disbelief, her earlier courtroom tears completely gone. You couldn't just let me be happy, could you? You were always jealous of me, ever since we were kids. I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, and the last vestiges of sisterly connection I might have harbored dissolved into dust. I didn't see my sister. I saw a stranger, a sad, grasping woman who would forever blame others for the consequences of her own choices. And I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where my love and obligation for her used to reside. I don't think about you at all, Emma, I said, my voice soft but clear. Your happiness was never my responsibility. And now, thanks to your own actions, neither are you. I turned to walk away. My mother started forward, her mouth open to spew more venom, but my father, for the first time in his life, put a hand on her arm. He just shook his head, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. As we reached the end of the hall, I heard the sound I had been subconsciously waiting for my whole life, the sound of their toxic universe finally collapsing in on itself. This was your idea? David's voice, shrill with panic and blame. My idea? Emma shrieked back, her voice echoing in the marble corridor. It was your fault for being so stupid and getting caught. You were supposed to handle it. The sound of their crumbling world was the last thing I ever heard from them. A year has passed. My house is my sanctuary again, but it's different now. It's not a fortress against the world, it's an open, warm space filled with light and the laughter of real friends. The restraining order was a clean cut, a surgical removal of a cancer I hadn't realized was metastasizing through my entire life. Last month, I celebrated winning the coveted Regional Architecture Prize for the library design, the one that was on my desk during my mother's meltdown. I hosted a small party, and my home was filled with my chosen family, Jessica, Mrs. Thompson, and the other friends who had stood by me. There was no drama, only joy. A few weeks ago, I started volunteering as a mentor for a nonprofit that helps young women launch their own businesses. My first mentee, a brilliant, fiery young graphic designer named Chloe, was telling me about her own family, how they constantly belittled her ambitions, urging her to get a safe job. "I just want to prove them wrong," she said, her eyes shining with a familiar, defiant light. I smiled, a real, easy smile. "Here's a secret," I told her, leaning forward. "The goal isn't to prove them wrong. You'll waste your whole life playing a game they designed, on a field they tilted. The goal is to build a life so full and so beautiful that their opinions become irrelevant background noise. Forgiveness, if you ever get there, is a gift you give yourself, not them. It's the act of putting down the poison so you can stop drinking it. But forgiveness never, ever means you have to open that door again." Last night, Jessica sent me a text. It was a screenshot from a mutual acquaintance's social media page. It showed a grainy picture of David and Emma and their toddler in what looked like a dreary, suburban backyard in a town I'd never heard of. The caption read, "So happy these two have found their footing after a tough year. #new beginnings." For a moment, I just stared at the picture of their faces. They looked tired. They looked ordinary. Then, without a flicker of emotion, I pressed delete. It was just noise from a distant galaxy. My life was finally quiet. This morning, I was out in my garden. It's my favorite place now, my hands in the earth. I spent a long time last spring pulling out all the bitter, stubborn weeds that had choked the flower beds for years, thistles of guilt, creeping vines of obligation. As I worked, I'd see their faces in the ugly, gnarled roots. But today, I was planting new seedlings, my hands covered in rich, dark soil. I pulled out one last, tenacious weed from around the base of a young peony, its green shoots tender but strong. I tossed it into the discard pile, a final act of clearing. The space around the new plant was clean, clear, and ready for growth. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands, and looked not at the ground, but toward the horizon. The sun was warm on my face. It felt like a new beginning. It felt like my own, quiet, unassailable peace. It felt like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I truly hope it can help someone out there who feels trapped by obligations that are hurting them. My question for you is, have you ever had to make a hard decision to choose your own peace over a toxic family dynamic? I'd love to read about your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe for more.